Welcome to World Rare Coins Vault. Today, we're uncovering 5 fascinating UK 5 pence coins that every collector should take a closer look at. From a dusty 1980 and a circulated 1970, to a fine 1979, a good condition 1971, and outdated-looking 1969. Each coin has its own story, history, and collector appeal. So, before you spend your old 5 pence coins, stay with us until the end, because one of these coins might be far more interesting than it first appears. Let's begin our search for the top 5 rare 5 pence coins. Let's get started up with the British 5 pence coin dated 1980. And this particular example is described as being in a dusty condition. At first glance, it may look like nothing more than a small piece of old pocket change. But when collectors examine an older coin carefully, the date, design, condition, originality, and overall appearance can all become important. So stay with us, because in today's episode we're going to explore this 1985 pence from every angle and discuss an illustrative, fictional high-value scenario in US dollars purely for entertainment. Remember, the real value of a coin depends on its exact variety, condition, authenticity, and what collectors are actually willing to pay. The 1980 British 5 pence belongs to an interesting period in modern British coinage. The 5 pence denomination had already become a familiar part of everyday life, and these coins are produced in very large numbers for circulation. The design represents a fascinating chapter in Britain's decimal coinage history, which began in 1971. By 1980, people across the United Kingdom were regularly using decimal coins in shops, buses, cafes, and everyday transactions. That makes a surviving 1985 pence more than simply a dated object. It is a small reminder of Britain during the early years of decimal currency, and for collectors, that historical connection can make even a common circulating coin worth examining carefully. Now, let's turn our attention to the appearance of the coin. On the obverse, you would expect to find the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II used during this period, designed by Arnold Machin. Her portrait faces to the right, with the surrounding lettering identifying the monarch. This side is particularly important when examining an older coin, because collectors look closely at the portrait, lettering, and rim for signs of wear, damage, or unusual striking characteristics. When we move to the reverse, the traditional design associated with the 5 pence denomination features a crowned thistle, representing Scotland, surrounded by the denomination and inscription. The simplicity of this design is part of its charm. It is recognizable, distinctly British, and strongly connected with the visual language of decimal coinage from that era. The physical specifications are another interesting part of the story. The larger old-style 5 pence coin used during this period had a substantial feel compared with the much smaller 5 pence coins familiar today. Its weight was approximately 5.65 grams, and its size and shape gave a noticeable presence in the hand. For collectors, weight is not just an interesting fact. It can also be a useful part of an authenticity check. If a supposed 1985 pence differs significantly from the expected specifications, it may deserve closer examination. However, a small difference on a home scale does not automatically mean that a coin is rare, because dirt, wear, measuring equipment, and other factors can affect the reading. Now we come to the part that creates the greatest excitement among collectors: rarity and condition. This particular example is described as dusty, and that immediately tells us that its surface needs careful attention. Dust and ordinary dirt can hide details, but cleaning the coin aggressively can actually reduce its collector appeal. A coin with original surfaces and natural aging may be more desirable than one that has been polished or chemically cleaned. Collectors often inspect the sharpness of the portrait, the lettering, the reverse design, the rim, and the overall surface. They also look for unusual errors, varieties, striking problems, or other characteristics that could separate one example from another. The date alone does not automatically make a 1985 pence rare, so it is important not to confuse age with rarity. And now, let's have some fun with the market value discussion. For this video, imagine a fictional collector competition in which an unusually interesting example of this 1985 pence attracts enormous attention. In our entertainment scenario, a headline figure could be $5,000, written as 5,000 US dollars, while an especially dramatic fictional auction story could imagine $25,000 or $25,000, being offered for a spectacular example with an extraordinary combination of characteristics. In an even more exaggerated fictional scenario, imagine a collector placing a value of $100,000 or 100,000 US dollars on an exceptional piece. These figures are deliberately fictional examples for storytelling and should not be treated as genuine market prices for an ordinary 1985 pence. The real value of a typical coin could be dramatically lower, while an authenticated error or genuinely scarce variety could command a premium depending on demand. This is why collectors should never judge a coin simply by seeing a huge number attached to a similar-looking example online. The exact coin matters. Condition matters. Authenticity matters. Provenance can matter. Most importantly, genuine sales and recognized auction results matter far more than an unrealistic asking price. A seller can list a coin for almost any amount, but that does not mean somebody has actually paid that amount. If you ever discover a 1985 pence that appears unusual, compare it carefully with reliable references, weigh it accurately, inspect both sides under good lighting, and, if necessary, seek an experienced numismatist's opinion before making any decision. There is also one very important tip for anyone discovering an old coin in a drawer, box, or collection. Do not rush to clean it. That dusty appearance may tempt you to polish the surface until it shines, but cleaning can leave scratches, hairlines, and unnatural surfaces that collectors may consider undesirable. Instead, handle the coin gently by its edges and keep it somewhere dry and protected. Taking clear photographs of both sides can also help you compare the details with other examples. As we reach the end of today's discovery, the 1980 British 5 pence reminds us why coin collecting can be so exciting. A small coin that once passed through countless hands can survive for decades and eventually become part of someone's collection. Its date connects us with the early years of decimal Britain. Its designs reflect the identity of a United Kingdom, and its condition tells a story about how it has traveled through time. Even when a coin is not genuinely worth thousands of dollars, it can still have historical, educational, and sentimental value. Next up, the year 1970 is especially interesting because it sits immediately before the major transition to decimal currency in the United Kingdom. Britain was preparing for Decimal Day, which arrived in 1971, and the 5 pence denomination became part of that new decimal system. The early decimal 5 pence was closely connected in size and value to the old shilling, which helped the public adjust to the new currency. A coin dated 1970, therefore belongs to an important period of change in British monetary history. When you hold one today, you are looking at a small surviving piece from the final chapter of pre-decimal Britain and the preparation for a completely new way of handling everyday money. Looking closely at the obverse, the coin carries a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, facing to the right. The portrait used on these early decimal coins was designed by Arnold Machin, one of the most recognizable British coin designers of the 20th century. Around the portrait is the lettering associated with the monarch, creating the formal appearance expected on British currency. When examining a circulated example, the first areas collectors often notice are the highest points of the portrait and the surrounding lettering, where from years of handling can gradually soften these details, but even a well-used coin can retain enough of its original design to make it an enjoyable piece for a collection. Turn the coin over and the reverse presents another unmistakable British symbol, the crown thistle, representing Scotland. The thistle sits prominently within the reverse design, accompanied by the denomination. It is a relatively simple composition, but that simplicity gives the coin a distinctive character. Collectors can examine the crown, leaves, lettering, rim, and other details for signs of wear or unusual characteristics. On a circulated coin, small marks, scratches, and changes in color are perfectly understandable because the piece was made to be used rather than stored away untouched. The combination of the royal portrait and Scottish thistle makes this 5 pence a fascinating example of British identity represented through coinage. The weight is another useful detail. The early large-sized British 5 pence had a weight of approximately 5.65 grams. Its larger format made it feel quite different from the much smaller 5 pence coins that people commonly see today. For collectors, checking the weight can be a useful part of examining an old coin, especially when there is a question about authenticity or whether a particular piece matches the expected specifications. However, a home measurement should only be treated as an initial check. Dirt, where inaccurate scales and other factors can cause small differences. So weight should always be considered alongside diameter, design, and other characteristics. Now, let's talk about the circulated condition of this 1970 example. A circulated coin can show evidence of a long journey through everyday life. Perhaps it was exchanged in a shop, carried in a pocket, placed into a till, or passed from one person to another. Over the years, repeated contact can create small scratches, surface marks, and softer design details. That does not make the coin uninteresting. In fact, many collectors enjoy circulated coins because they show genuine evidence of use. The key question is whether the coin has anything else that makes it particularly desirable, such as an authentic minting error, an unusual variety, or an exceptionally attractive original surface. This is also where the difference between being old and being rare becomes extremely important. A 1970 date may sound impressive because the coin is more than half a century old, but age alone does not automatically make a coin rare. Collectors consider production numbers, survival rates, varieties, errors, condition, and demand. A heavily circulated example, without any unusual feature, may have modest collector interest, while an authenticated example with a genuine and significant minting error could attract considerably more attention. So if you have one of these coins, don't judge it solely by its date. Examine the entire piece. Now comes the exciting market value section. For today's video, let's imagine a fictional high-demand auction scenario purely for entertainment. Suppose a collector discovers an unusually interesting 1975 pence with a spectacular authenticated error, and intense competition develops between buyers. In our imaginary scenario, the bidding could reach $3,000, meaning 3,000 US dollars. If the coin had an exceptionally unusual combination of characteristics, we could imagine our fictional auction climbing to $10,000 or $10,000. And for an extreme storytelling example, imagine a dramatic final bid of $50,000, which is 50,000 US dollars. These figures are fictional and should not be interpreted as the genuine market value of an ordinary circulated 1975 pence. The reality is much more important than sensational numbers. A normal circulated coin should not automatically be considered a thousands of dollars treasure simply because someone claims it is. A genuine value depends on the exact variety, condition, authenticity, rarity, and actual collector demand. Asking prices are not the same as confirmed selling prices. If you ever see a very large price attached to a similar coin, investigate what makes that particular example special, and whether there is evidence that the price was actually achieved. This simple habit can help collectors avoid unrealistic valuations and misleading information. If you own a 1975 pence, one of the best things you can do is preserve it rather than try to make it look new. Avoid polishing, rubbing, or using household chemicals. Cleaning can permanently alter the surface and may actually make an otherwise attractive collectible less desirable. Hold the coin by its edges when possible. Keep it in suitable protective storage and avoid exposing it to unnecessary moisture. If you think your coin has an unusual feature, photograph both sides clearly and compare the details carefully. For potentially valuable errors or varieties, professional examination can be worthwhile before you attempt to sell anything. Next up, the British 5 pence coin dated 1979, and this particular example is described as being in fine condition. It may look like a familiar piece of old decimal currency, but coins from earlier decades can become fascinating discoveries when their dates, designs, surfaces, and unusual characteristics are examined closely. In this episode, we are going beyond the face value and taking a detailed look at the story behind the 1979 5 pence, including its historical background, portraits and design, weight, condition, rarity, and an entertaining fictional high-value market scenario in US dollars. So keep watching, because this little 5 pence has a story worth discovering. The late 1970s were an interesting period for British decimal coinage. Decimalization had already transformed the nation's currency, and the 5 pence had become an established part of everyday British life. The denomination was familiar to millions of people and was regularly used for ordinary purchases and transactions. The 1979 issue therefore belongs to a period when decimal coins were no longer something completely new, but were firmly established in the pockets, tills, and purses of the public. Looking back today, a 5 pence from this period provides collectors with a small window into everyday Britain during the late 1970s. The obverse gives us one of the most important features of the coin, the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. The early decimal 5 pence carried the famous portrait created by Arnold Mackin, with the Queen facing to the right. The design has a distinctive simplicity that makes these early decimal coins instantly recognizable. Around the portrait are the traditional inscriptions associated with the monarch. On a fine condition example, the portrait should still retain a reasonable amount of definition, although small areas of where it can be visible. Collectors often study the shape of the features, lettering, and rim carefully, because these areas can reveal how much handling the coin has experienced over the years. When we turn the coin over, the reverse shows the crown thistle, the traditional Scottish emblem chosen for the 5 pence denomination. The thistle design gives the coin a strong connection with British heraldic and national symbolism. Around the central design are the denomination and other details that complete the reverse. On a fine condition coin, collectors would expect the major elements of the thistle and crown to remain reasonably clear, even though there may be minor marks or evidence of circulation. Looking at both sides together allows us to appreciate how much thought went into making even a small denomination visually meaningful. The physical size and weight of this early 5 pence are also worth remembering. The larger 5 pence used during this era weighed approximately 5.65 grams. Compared with the modern 5 pence people know today, these older examples have a noticeably larger appearance and a different feel in the hand. Weight can be useful when examining an old coin because it gives collectors another characteristic to compare with known specifications. However, a small difference on a household scale does not automatically prove that a coin is unusual. A proper assessment should consider the weight together with the diameter, metal, design, and overall construction of the coin. Now let's focus on the fine condition of this 1979 example. Fine condition suggests that the coin has experienced circulation, but still retains a good amount of its original design detail. You may see light to moderate where across the highest points of the portrait and reverse, together with small marks from everyday handling. For many collectors, this is an attractive balance between history and preservation. The coin has clearly lived a life, yet its important features remain visible. The surface color may also have changed naturally over the decades, and that aged appearance can contribute to the character of an older coin. But is the 1979 date itself enough to make this 5 pence rare? Not necessarily. One of the most important lessons in coin collecting is that old does not always mean rare. Rarity depends on factors such as how many were produced, how many survive, whether particular varieties exist, and how strongly collectors want them. A normal circulated 1979 5 pence should not automatically be valued at thousands of dollars simply because it is several decades old. The real excitement begins when a coin has something genuinely unusual, such as a recognized variety, an authentic minting error, or an exceptional level of preservation. Now imagine an exciting fictional auction for a moment. In our entertainment-only scenario, suppose this 1979 5 pence turns out to have an extraordinary and professionally authenticated error that attracts serious attention from collectors. The imaginary bidding could rise to $4,000 or $4,000. If competition became even stronger, perhaps our fictional auction could reach $12,000, meaning $12,000. And for the most dramatic example, imagine an exceptionally unusual piece achieving a fictional final bid of $30,000 or $30,000. These figures are deliberately fictional and are not the genuine market values of an ordinary 1979 5 pence. This distinction is extremely important because the internet is full of dramatic coin valuations. A coin being advertised for a huge amount does not mean that somebody has actually paid that amount. Genuine market value is normally established through real transactions, specialist knowledge, condition assessments, and collector demand. If you believe you have a valuable example, don't simply compare it with the highest asking price you can find. Instead, examine exactly why that particular coin is considered special and whether the claimed value is supported by credible evidence. So, as we come to the end of today's story, the 1979 British 5 pence remains a fascinating little piece of Britain's decimal coinage history. Its fine condition gives it a pleasing balance between preservation and evidence of real-world use, while its design connects a royal portrait of Queen Elizabeth II with the crowned Scottish thistle. Whether your example is completely ordinary or contains a genuinely unusual characteristic, it can still be an enjoyable addition to a collection and a reminder of how everyday money can survive for generations. Next up, the 1971 landmark year, when Britain officially entered the decimal age, to examine a 5-pence coin in good condition. This is not just another old coin with a date on it. The year 1971 represents a major turning point in British monetary history, and the 5-pence played an important role in that transformation. So stay with us as we explore this coin story, its design, physical characteristics, condition, rarity, and a fictional high-value scenario that shows why collectors are always looking twice at historic coins. The year 1971 holds a special place in the history of British money because it was the year of decimalization. On Decimal Day, Britain moved away from the complicated pre-decimal system and adopted the decimal pound, making 1 pound equal to 100 pence. The 5 pence became one of the important denominations in this new system. Interestingly, the early 5 pence was designed to be familiar to the public because it was closely related in value and size to the old shilling. This helped people adapt to decimal currency during a period of enormous change. As a result, a 1971 5 pence is connected directly with one of the most significant changes ever made to British everyday money. Now let's examine the obverse or head side of the coin. The 1971 5 pence features the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II facing to the right. This early decimal portrait was created by renowned British designer Arnold Machin. The portrait is elegant and relatively simple, giving the coin a distinctive appearance that collectors can recognize immediately. Around the portrait is the inscription identifying the monarch. On a good condition example, some signs of circulation can be expected, particularly around the raised parts of the portrait and lettering, but the main features should remain reasonably clear. The obverse is one of the first places collectors look when judging how much wear a coin has experienced. Turn the coin over and you will see the reverse design featuring the crowned thistle, representing Scotland. The thistle is placed prominently at the center, with the denomination and surrounding lettering completing the design. It is a small but meaningful representation of British identity, combining national symbolism with the practical purpose of a new decimal denomination. On a good condition example, the thistle, crown, and lettering should still be visible, although circulation may have softened some of the finer details. Examining this side carefully can reveal whether the coin has normal wear or something that deserves further investigation. The physical specifications make this early 5 pence particularly interesting. The large-size 5 pence of this period weighed approximately 5.65 grams. It was considerably larger in appearance than the modern 5 pence coin that people use today. This difference in size is one of the reasons older British decimal coins can surprise people when they first encounter them. Weight is also a useful tool for collectors. If you find a supposed 1971 5 pence, weighing it can provide a useful comparison with the expected specification. However, weight alone should never be used to declare a coin rare or valuable. A proper assessment requires several characteristics to be checked together. Now we come to the condition of our example, described as good condition. A good condition coin has clearly experienced circulation, and you may notice visible wear across the portrait, lettering, and reverse design. Small scratches, marks, and changes in surface color can also be present. Rather than seeing these imperfections as something negative, collectors can view them as evidence of the coin's journey through everyday life. Imagine this 5 pence moving through Britain in 1971 and the years that followed, passing from one person to another and being used for ordinary purchases. Every mark may represent another chapter in its long journey. But here's the important question. Does being from 1971 automatically make this 5 pence extremely rare? The answer is no. A coin can be historically important without being exceptionally scarce. Rarity is determined by several factors, including production numbers, survival rates, varieties, minting errors, and collector demand. A normal 1971 5 pence in good circulated condition may be an interesting historical coin without being a thousands of dollars rarity. However, collectors should still inspect these coins carefully because unusual varieties, Genuine minting errors or exceptionally preserved examples can be considerably more interesting. Now let's enter an exciting fictional auction scenario for today's video. Imagine that our 1971 5 pence has been examined and, purely for this entertainment story, is found to possess an extraordinary authenticated minting error that attracts international collectors. The fictional bidding begins at $2,000 or $2,000 and quickly rises. A determined collector pushes the imaginary price to $8,000, meaning $8,000. Then, in our most dramatic fictional moment, the final bid reaches $20,000 or $20,000. These figures are completely fictional examples for entertainment and should not be mistaken for genuine market prices for a normal 1971 5 pence. The real world of coin collecting works very differently from sensational online claims. A coin being listed for $20,000 does not mean it is worth $20,000 because an asking price and an actual selling price are two very different things. Genuine market value depends on what collectors are actually prepared to pay for a particular coin, supported by factors such as authenticity, condition, rarity, and recognized varieties. If you find 1971 5 pence and believe it might be special, take your time. Don't rush into selling it simply because somebody has attached a huge number to a similar-looking coin. As we reach the end of today's discovery, the 1971 5 pence stands out because of its connection to Britain's decimal revolution. It represents a moment when the country's entire monetary system changed, and this little coin became part of everyday life during that historic transition. Its Queen Elizabeth II portrait, crown thistle reverse, and larger early decimal format all contribute to its character. Even in good circulated condition, it remains an interesting piece of British numismatic history. Next up, the 1969 5 pence, an old example described as being in outdated condition. The date alone makes this coin fascinating because it comes from the period when Britain was preparing for one of the biggest changes in its monetary history. But could a coin from 1969 be hiding something that makes collectors stop and take a second look? In this episode, we'll explore its history, design, weight, condition, rarity, and an exciting fictional high-value scenario in US dollars. So keep watching, because this little 5 pence has more history behind it than you might expect. To understand why a 1969 5 pence attracts attention, we need to look at the world in which it was produced. Britain was still using the pre-decimal currency system in 1969, with pounds, shillings, and pence forming the basis of everyday transactions. At the same time, the country was preparing for decimalization, which would officially take place in 1971. The new decimal denominations were introduced ahead of Decimal Day so that people could become familiar with them. The 5 pence was one of these new denominations, and its early large-size format was deliberately made familiar to the public. This makes a 1969 example especially interesting because it belongs to the preparation period immediately before Britain's complete transition to decimal money. On the head side, the coin carries a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, facing to the right. The portrait was designed by Arnold Machin, whose work became one of the most recognizable images on British decimal coinage. The royal portrait gives the coin an unmistakably British identity, while the surrounding inscription identifies the monarch. When examining an older piece, collectors pay attention to the details of the portrait, the lettering, and the rim. On an example described as being in outdated condition, some of these details may be considerably worn, softened, or affected by marks accumulated over decades. Even so, the portrait remains an important part of the coin's historical character. Turn the coin over and the reverse reveals the crown thistle, the Scottish national emblem chosen for 5 pence. The design places the thistle prominently at the center, surrounded by the denomination and other lettering. It is a relatively simple design, but it carries a strong connection with Britain's national heritage. On a heavily aged example, the crown, leaves, and lettering may show significant wear. Collectors can still study the remaining details to determine how much of the original design survives. Comparing those details with a better preserved example can be an excellent way to understand the effects of circulation and aging. The physical specifications of this early 5 pence are another fascinating part of the story. The large-size 5 pence used during this period weighed approximately 5.65 grams. Its substantial size makes it noticeably different from the smaller 5-pence coins that became familiar in later years. For someone who has only seen modern 5-pence pieces, holding one of these early examples can be quite surprising. Weight is also useful when examining a coin because it provides one more characteristic that can be compared against known specifications. However, collectors should never rely on weight alone when deciding whether a coin is genuine or rare. Diameter, metal design, and other characteristics should all be considered together. Now, let's look closely at the condition described as outdated. In practical collecting terms, this suggests an example that has suffered considerable aging and wear, with its surfaces potentially showing dirt, scratches, discoloration, and softened design details. A coin in this state may not have the same visual appeal as a high-grade example, but it can still be historically interesting. In fact, the worn appearance can tell us something about the coin's journey. It may have spent years moving through ordinary British commerce, resting in pockets, tills, and purses before eventually being kept as an old coin. This brings us to one of the biggest questions collectors ask. Is a 1969 5-pence automatically rare because of its age? The answer is not necessarily. Age and rarity are two different things. A coin can be more than 50 years old and still exist in large numbers. True rarity depends on factors such as how many were produced, how many survived, whether particular varieties exist, and how much demand there is from collectors. An outdated condition example without any unusual characteristic may have limited monetary value, while genuinely rare variety or authenticated minting error could attract much greater interest. The important thing is to investigate the exact coin rather than relying on the date alone. Now, let's imagine a dramatic fictional auction for today's entertainment. Suppose our 1969 5-pence is examined by specialists and, in this imaginary story, an extraordinary authenticated minting error is discovered. Suddenly, collectors become extremely interested. The fictional bidding begins at $3,500, which is $3,500 US. The competition grows, and the imaginary price rises to $15,000 or $15,000. Then comes a dramatic moment. Two determined collectors compete until a fictional final bid reaches $40,000, meaning $40,000 US. These figures are completely fictional and are included purely for entertainment. They should not be interpreted as a genuine value of an ordinary 1969 5-pence. In the real collecting world, a normal coin does not become worth thousands simply because a dramatic figure appears in a video or online listing. Asking prices can be extremely different from actual completed sales. The genuine value of a coin depends on its exact variety, authenticity, condition, rarity, and collector demand. If you believe you found an unusual 1969 5-pence, the best approach is to slow down and investigate it carefully. Look at the date, examine both sides, compare the design with known examples, and consider whether the feature you have noticed is actually a minting error or simply damage caused after the coin entered circulation. One of the most valuable tips for any collector is simple. Do not clean an old coin aggressively. A dusty or aged surface may make you want to polish it, but rubbing, chemicals, and abrasive materials can permanently damage the original surface. What appears to be an unattractive old finish may actually be natural aging that collectors prefer to preserve. Instead, hold the coin by its edges, keep it somewhere dry and protected, and photograph both sides clearly. If you believe there is a genuine error or rare variety, consider having it examined by an experienced numismatist before making any attempt to sell it. It is also useful to develop your eye by studying ordinary examples. The more genuine 5-pence coins you examine, the easier it becomes to recognize normal wear, contact marks, and surface damage. This knowledge can stop you from mistaking a scratch for a valuable error. At the same time, it helps you notice genuine differences that might deserve further investigation. Coin collecting is not simply about finding an expensive piece. It is about developing the knowledge to understand why one coin is different from another. As we come to the final part of today's journey, the 1969 British 5-pence remains an intriguing survivor from years immediately before decimalization. Its early decimal design, Queen Elizabeth II portrait, crown thistle reverse, and larger physical format all connected with a remarkable chapter in British monetary history. Even an outdated condition example can preserve a story about the transition from Britain's traditional currency system to decimal money, and about the countless people who used these coins during that historic era. And remember, the fictional figures featured today, $3,500, $15,000, and $40,000, are purely entertainment values and are not genuine market valuations for a standard 1969 5 pence. The true value of any coin must be established by examining its authenticity, condition, rarity, variety, and actual collector demand. So if you discover one of these old 5 pence coins, don't dismiss it simply because it looks worn. Take a closer look, protect it, learn about it, and investigate anything genuinely unusual. Thank you for watching World Rare Coins Vault. Keep searching, keep learning, and keep your eyes open, because sometimes an old coin can carry a story far greater than its size suggests.